Hello, everyone. Welcome to Chasing a Murderer. Good morning, and I hope everyone is, their new year is starting out fabulous. So, we're still on this case, and it's coming out of Idaho with the 4 University of Idaho students that were slain. And in a recent article written by Edward Helmier, he mentioned the fact that the family of Bryan Christopher Kohberger, who was arrested as a suspect in these slayings, his family has shared a statement. His parents say that they are cooperating with law enforcement. Putting it in a nutshell, Bryan's parents say that they promote his presumption of innocence. A lot of people are wondering how they defend their son. Well, first, as a parent, it's hard to believe that your kid can do such things. And second, well, they're waiting to see the evidence that links him to these murders, just like the rest of us. In our country, United States of America, you are innocent until proven guilty. In this statement, it appeared that they showed empathy towards the victims and families, Ethan, Madison, Zana, and Kaylee. Now remember, it's weeks later. Bryan Kohberger was arrested just recently, December 31st, after the holidays, just before the new year, at his parents' home in Pennsylvania. And a lot of you have commented on something that I'm going to share today, and that's the fact that Kaylee's father suggests that there's a connection between Kaylee and Bryan.
The father of one of the murder victims, Steve Gonsalves, and his attorneys say they see connections between Kaylee and the suspect, but they aren't ready to talk about exactly what those connections are.
There's a lot of rumors that they are connected through a common restaurant. Now, since Bryan has been arrested, we're all trying to figure out who this guy is, and we can only figure it out through what's available to us online mostly. Several news sources have reached out to friends and neighbors of Bryan Kohberger, and I want to share some of those clips with you today. Now, two aunts actually talked to a reporter. They are married to siblings of Bryan Kohberger's father. So remember, we need to take this with a grain of salt because they were not hanging out with Bryan daily. She found out that Bryan's father's family originate from Brooklyn.
But I got this sense from both these aunts that the family was pretty odd.
So the aunts suggest that this family was pretty odd. We don't get a lot of details, but we get a smidget. Michael, Bryan's father, they claim was estranged from the rest of his siblings, and that Michael could be difficult with his siblings. So this gives you a glimpse into something, but didn't really help, because they don't really say a whole lot about Bryan either. However, one of these aunts were able to share something that was helpful to people following this case, and it was about the food fetish that many of you have mentioned in the comments. Being vegan, they suggest that he didn't like meat in the pans that he cooked in. And while visiting one of these aunts, according to that aunt, Bryan wanted them to purchase new pans that have been untouched by meat. And to them, they seen this as an OCD. This is coming from News Nation, and I know a lot of people like watching News Nation. I'm kind of walking a fine line simply because they try to dramatize things too much. I'm more about the solid facts. Now, she said that she spoke to several of these aunts and even broke the news about Bryan being arrested, and that they weren't that surprised and they were very matter of fact. Again, no details. One of Bryan's old high school friends, now guys, it seemed that he might be a little bit antisocial, but doesn't seem so. It seems possible that he was trying to be very social, but he was being rejected. But let's listen to this guy who witnessed some moments with Bryan Kohberger. This is a male friend, and he says that Bryan would be kind of dominating.
He would like grapple me and like put me in headlocks and arm bars and stuff.
That seems like normal horseplay for guys, but maybe not. So this next witness says she was surprised.
And she said the person they arrested was Bryan Kohberger. And immediately I freaked out naturally. I went back inside work and I called about 8 of my friends. It was a shock because there's literally 7 billion people in this world and I know him. I was friends with him. Like, that's terrifying.
She met Bryan through her younger brother while in school.
And just hung out and talked, and that's what it was. It wasn't anything crazy, just a typical friendship.
Nothing stood out there. A lot of people have turned their focus to the fact that there's a possibility that Bryan knew of Kaylee or knew Kaylee. In fact, his arrest was made on the same day that they were holding a vigil for Kaylee.
The arrest comes the same day as his family is holding a celebration of life for Kaylee.
Also, there were neighbors talking to media sources, and many of them claiming that things were quite odd, while others really didn't know too much.
Neighbors around his Pullman apartment still trying to understand the motive.
He would talk about he wants to know why people commit crime, what is the key reason behind crimes, and how people think while committing them.
So after the crimes took place November 13th of 2022, after Bryan was arrested December 30th, people were able to look back and think about the demeanor of Bryan, particularly the neighbors and students surrounding him.
I didn't want to think about what even happened out there. I just want the families to have clarity. I want them to have some type of just answers to questions that they don't have. And I know that we won't get those answers, or they won't get those answers until they actually hear from him. And
as an arrest comes, for many Idaho residents, a sense of shock in a state they associate with safety.
It's tragic because it doesn't reconcile with the experience that I've had living here, where everyone is so friendly and so nice. You know, there's no place where you're truly safe.
Now, I'm going to share some interesting new facts. Possibly you've heard them, maybe not. Now, remember, people are talking about this famous forensic professor, the woman who has wrote a book and talked to the BYK killer, Dr. Catherine Ramsland. Law and Crime have a full interview that you can check out where they ask her a few questions and she shares some of her thoughts, but she doesn't really go into Kohberger.
I have a class in dangerous minds that I teach at the undergraduate and graduate level, and that is really about extreme offenders, which is mass murderers, spree killers, and serial killers. So that's primarily what I do most of my work on, and most of what the students want from me. That class fills up very quickly.
And so there's a lot of talk that Bryan has taken this lady's class. Doesn't mean anything? Well, only thing it means to me is that he was very interested in the topics she taught. And there's a few students that said that he would stand up in her class, interrupt her, talking as if he almost knew more than she did. So that kind of matches one witness that said that they knew Bryan, at least through school, who said that he was quite imposing. What we have learned so far is he seems to be that true crime buff. He's intelligent. He's been bullied. According to others, he has bullied a time or two. He's very masculine. Can be rough when he's with the fellas. He's very intrigued with learning psychology of the criminals. Even neighbors can attest to this. People who have had run-ins with him do notice that he is very sociable when he starts talking about crime. But there's something very interesting that just come out, and Daily Mail was covering it. Actually, there are a couple things that come out that I think you guys would be interested in checking out. According to Daily Mail, B.K. Norton, who was in the same criminal justice graduate program as Bryan Kohberger, said her classmate appeared more animated and talkative following the murders. Quote, "He seemed more upbeat and willing to carry a conversation," she told New York Times. But Norton noted all this enthusiasm would go away and he would become quiet and deadpan. And this is when the class would discuss the Idaho murder case. She said, quote, "I don't believe he had any reaction," end quote. So this guy that likes to talk about cases and impose even over the famous forensic doctor was now quiet. And while everyone else was glued to the case, and speculated on the lack of public information. And she says this wasn't even a very small conversation. She said, quote, "We had quite a long conversation in class about it. I don't believe I remember him commenting about it at all," end quote. And so here's the thing. We know that Kohberger, well, he marked himself as a libertarian. And so this next comment from another student that spoke under animosity, he backs up Norton's claim and says that Kohberger didn't have many friends in school because of the alleged LGBTQ plus the remarks he made. So here is this guy who is usually eager to talk about crime. According to his classmates, he's not so eager. And I can't help but think, what is going through his mind during this time? If he is actually responsible for these murders, he's sitting in his classroom, he's listening to his classmates talk about the crime he committed. Is he interested in how people react? Is he wondering about himself? Is he regretful? Is he excited? I mean, this is a very interesting guy for me. I'm just wondering what is going through his mind. Knowing that he likes to work undercover, he likes to be kind of secretive, at least that's what I'm gathering. Maybe he's enjoying this as infamous strategy of being famous. Who knows, and will we ever know? So here's an interesting thing, probably one of the most interesting things that's come out since this case has begun. A girl on TikTok knows Bryan Kohberger, and she listens to these true crime shows. There's a clip that takes to TikTok coming from a podcast, T-Rex, and well, it's gone viral. Her name is Casey. She said after listening to this podcast, she believed that that voice was very familiar and that she believed that voice to belong to Bryan Kohberger. In this podcast clip, the caller identifies himself as Dave, and she believes Dave is truly Bryan. The clip has since been sent to the FBI, and I'm going to let you listen to this clip. They're discussing the Idaho murders, and they ask Dave how to commit the perfect murder. But you can hear in the podcaster's voice that he's like, what the heck's going on here? So I'm not certain when this come out, but maybe you guys know about it now. You can look it up and find out more information. So again, it's basically based off of, them talking about the Idaho murder. So here's a clip.
Hey, what's up, man? Is this T-Rex?
Yes, sir. What's going on?
Not much, man. I found you today. I watched your live earlier this afternoon and been watching this one. And the thing that strikes me kind of weird about all this is that I live in a college town, and I've worked with probably at least 10 Sigma Chi members, and the one thing that every single one of them I feel like has asked me is, if you were going to kill somebody, how would you get away with it? And I just wonder if maybe this is nothing more than some kid in a fraternity trying to prove himself. And that was it.
So you said you worked with 5 or 6 Sigma Chi kids, and they asked you if you can kill somebody, they can get away with it?
Yeah.
Did I hear that right?
Yeah. Oh my God! I know that's a thing that just maybe people say, trying to have interesting conversation, but just in my head, it's it's always been these dudes that were in the fraternity. And so it makes me wonder if it's a thing that's in their culture that they ask to see how smart you are and whatever, and what kind of answer you come up with, and someone took it too far.
What kind of dudes would ask you that? That's crazy as shit, man. That's an outrageous statement, man. I'd write their names down.
Yeah, man.
Podcaster says I'd write their names down. So just before we go any further, guys, no, we're not saying this is Bryan at all. This is a podcast that one of Bryan Kohberger's friends listened to and thought that voice sounded familiar. And so they sent it to the FBI. We've yet to know if they identified this voice. We do know that there isn't a voice that's come forward, at least I don't know, to claim it. A lot of you like to cover these kinds of things, and I usually don't, but we'll do this one. And let's pretend it's Bryan. If it were him, some of the concerning things that he said was the fact that maybe this is somebody, a young kid trying to prove himself, which would basically fill in the chains to where he's being kind of shunned away. We know there are hints he's being shunned away by the LGBTQ because they don't like what he has to say. I mean, I don't do that to people. If I don't like what they have to say, well, I just don't like what they have to say. I'm not into that cancel culture. Very, very toxic to the community and to individuals. We are all different, and I believe that you have the right to say whatever you have to say. And so you got to think, is Bryan dealing with that in school? And we know that he was very persistent and given his ideas, his thoughts in the classroom. So if it turns out to be Bryan who was on this podcast, well, that's going to be a total different level added to this case. And people that are suspecting that it's close to the BTK killer. Well, guys, it's very interesting, but we just don't have enough evidence to clearly even speculate. But, we can try. We just got to worry about, make sure it's not doing damage to people. There have been people arrested in the past that they've had the wrong people. And I'm always worried about true justice. I want to make sure that people are judged fairly. But guys, that has nothing to do with discussions. If you guys want to share what you think, share it below in the comments. And let me tell you, I'm not cancel culture. If you have something to say that's different from what I believe, well, I'm going to respect that. As long as you leave respectful comments, there's nothing wrong with anything you write. So share your thoughts below. And before I close out, guys, I want to remind you that we have many missing girls out there, children. Their stories, well, there's no justice. Summer Wells and Dulce, Jasmine Robinson, check them out. Hey, and before we go, if you like the work that I put out, which is hard work, like, subscribe, share. Love you guys, and I'll see you guys soon.